This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
There is a remarkable revelation in the Sefer HaLikutim in Parshas Vayaishev, of course in the name of the Arizal, the Sefer HaKavonos, Shah HaKavonos, that Rabbi Akiva, the great Rabbi Akiva, was a Gilgal of Yaakov Avinu, a reincarnation of Yaakov Avinu. And he says that that's why the name Yaakov is embedded in the name Akiva. All the letters of Yaakov is in the name Akiva, the Yud, the Ayin, the Kuf, and the Beis. And he goes on to say that just like Yaakov was married to two women, he had also two shvachos, but he had two women, Rachel and Leah. So also Rabbi Akiva was married to two wives, Rachel and the wife of Turnus Rufus, the former wife of Turnus Rufus. And just like Yaakov Avinu was married to a Rachel, so Rabbi Akiva was married to a Rachel. And just like, I'll add, just like Rachel, Yaakov's Rachel passed away young, Rabbi Akiva's Rachel also passed away young. And he goes on to say, and the two wives, so the other wife, Ishtoi Shel Turnus Rufus, who was Megayer and married Rabbi Akiva, she became a Ger Tzedek and married Rabbi Akiva. So she was a Gilgal of Leah, and therefore it's understood why Leah was indeed worried that she would fall into the lot of Esav, because later on she would fall into a descendant of Esav and actually marry Turnus Rufus. Well, you know me, when I see something like this, so I was reflecting about it throughout the day, and if you look at the lives of Yaakov Avinu and Rabbi Akiva, there is an amazing amount of parallels. For example, we know that Yaakov had a lot of trouble with his shver. He had a lot of trouble with Lavan. And we also know, we know that it lasted for over 20 years. And it's almost an exact parallel because Rabbi Akiva initially had tremendous trouble with his father-in-law, Kalba Savua, who made a vow that he wouldn't be able to benefit from his property, which lasted for 24 plus years, right, until he found out he was a great Rabbi Akiva and he had his vow removed. We find that just like Yaakov Avinu had a period while he was learning of tremendous poverty, so that wealth should not be a deterrent to his learning. The same thing was true with Yaakov, with Rabbi Akiva. He lived tremendous poverty. We know that while he was married to Rachel, while he was the 24 years in the Beis Medrash, we know that he had to pick out straw from his wife's hair, and so much so they lived so impoverished that Hashem sent a malach to them, disguised as a poor man, if he could borrow some straw, so that Yaakov was able to tell Rachel, look, there are people poorer than us. Rabbi Akiva was able to tell Rachel that there are people poorer than us. So just like Yaakov had from rags to riches, so also Rabbi Akiva went from rags to riches. We know that he became wealthy from Kalba Savua and from the Gemara tells us other causes. He inherited the wealth of Turnus Rufus, and he found the money in the mast of a ship. All kinds of ways that Rabbi Akiva became wealthy. We find that Rabbi Akiva, that Yaakov Avinu was taman, was hidden in incredible, intense learning in the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever for 14 years, and Yaakov had that intense learning for 24 years. We find that Yaakov Avinu had a situation between the brothers that they didn't give honor to. There was a problem between Yosef and the brothers, and we find the same thing happened with with Rabbi Akiva that his Talmidim did not give covered one to another, the 24,000 Talmidim. The parallels between Yaakov and Rabbi Akiva, remember we said from the Arizal, if you're just coming in, the name Yaakov is embedded in the name of Akiva, and he was a Gilgal, says the Arizal, of Rabbi Akiva. There is another amazing parallel, and that is that we know that Rabbi Akiva saw the turning point in Rabbi Akiva's life was he saw the stone, and he saw that the water made an erosion in the stone, and he said if water could make a hole in stone, then surely Torah could make a hole in my heart of basar, in my heart of flesh. And we know that Yaakov had an incident with his stone. That's the famous incident of the stone that he put under his head, the stones, and they argued and they fused into one, and Yaakov set up that stone as a matzeva, right? So we see that they both had a incident with a stone that was a very big point in their life. So if you look, you'll see that there are amazing parallels between the life of Yaakov and his future Gilgal, Rabbi Akiva. And I can assure you that if you look through the life of Yaakov and Rabbi Akiva, you will find many more parallels. This was just to whet your taste buds. So we know that in this week's parsha, which, by the way, there's so much drama in this week's parsha, it's brought down in the Tosfos Shalom that except for every 8 psukim in this week's parsha, every pasuk in this week's parsha starts with a vav. It's really a rather remarkable thing. And Tosfos Shalom says that Tosfos Shalom says that it's because there's a lot of vay in this week's parsha, a lot of woe, sale of Yosef, and there's a lot of things what happened, the death of Yehuda's wife Shua, the death of his 2 children, Erva Oinan, the terror that almost happened to Tamar, the shame that happened to Yehuda. There's a lot of vay in this week's parsha, and that, by the way, is also in Rus. Almost every pasuk in Rus also starts with a vav. There's a lot of vay in the time of Rus. Boaz losing his family, his wife, many of his children, all of his children, as a matter of fact, and the death of Elimelech, the death of Machlon and Chilyon, the famine, the fact that it was Shvait HaShoiftim. There's a lot of drama in this week's parsha. But we know that one of the dramatic things that happened is Vayimkaru es Yosef, they sold Yosef. That was, of course, a tremendous drama. The Medrash Sheicher Toiv, and this might be one of the earliest sources for this. Everybody talks about it, but this might be one of the earliest sources. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Lo nimshichu asara harugei malchus. The events of the Asarei Harugei Malchus only happened. It only occurred that we lost the 10 awesome tzaddikim, one of the greatest of the history of mankind, including Rabbi Akiva. Lo nimshichu asar harugei malchus ela b'chet mechiras shel Yosef, except for the sin, only because of the sin of mechiras Yosef. So there were 10 harugei malchus because of mechiras Yosef. So Rabbeinu Bachya asks the obvious question. But there weren't 10 brothers that sold Yosef, because Reuven wasn't part of it. Of course, Binyamin wasn't part of it. And Yosef himself wasn't part of it. So why were there Asarei Harugei Malchus if there was only 9 Shvatim that sold Yosef? A very elementary question. So Rabbeinu Bachya gives 2 answers. The first answer is that Yosef himself was included in the punishment, because Yosef HaTzadik was the one that led up to it, that caused it, that generated it, by causing the brothers to be jealous, and also by bringing the Dibara. So therefore he was included in the 10. He then says another suggestion that maybe Yosef wasn't included, he was a victim, but Reuven was punished here along the way for the sin of moving his Bilhah's bed, because he moved his father's bed from the tent of Bilhah to the tent of Leah. And because he moved his father's bed, so he was now being punished for that as well. There is another answer given by, this is a very famous sefer, the Mishchas Shemen. The Mishchas Shemen gives an alternate answer that Yosef was the 10th one, but the claim on Yosef, the tain on Yosef was that he was never moichel the brothers. And all the historical problems that we had from the sin of Mechiras Yosef, Yosef told them that they shouldn't be troubled, but he never said, I forgive you. He never said, I moichel you. And because he wasn't moichel them, so therefore he was part of the disaster that happened to the Asara Harugei Malchus. And that's, by the way, a important thing that we should learn how to say those three words, I forgive you. We would cause a lot of grief not to happen if we learn how to say, because there's always punishment. And Bein Adam l'Chaveiroi, the punishment is not erased. Bein Adam l'Makam, Hashem could be noisei oven v'ayver al pasha. But the problems between people is not erased unless we say, I forgive you. I remember Reb Miller saying that before Yom Kippur, a husband and wife should say to each other, I forgive you. Should ask Mechila and they should say, I forgive you. Even if it's only because it's Erev Yom Kippur, he says the whole year is going to be different if a husband and wife say those three words, I forgive you. But I'd like to suggest another answer. And that is, we find that one of the Asara Harugei Malchus was Rabbi Akiva himself. So according to this that we just said from the Arizal, that Rabbi Akiva was a Gilgal of Yaakov Avinu, so therefore we could say that there was a taina here on Yaakov Avinu himself. Why? Because of the Shtei Sla Milas, because of the fact that he gave the Kseinas Pasim, which generated the jealousy. Well, the Gemara says, Bishvil Shnei Sla Milas, because of those 2 sela of wool that Yaakov gave extra to Yosef, we went down to Mitzrayim. So Yaakov was part of the problem, and therefore one of the Hasara Harugei Malchus was Rabbi Akiva, who we said was a Gilgal of Yaakov. That's an Arizal. We could add also, although I told you that this is highly debatable, but the Medrash Rabbeinu HaKadosh says that Yaakov was Mekabel Lashon Hara from Yosef. And we said that, look at whose punishment is worse. Is Yosef's punishment worse that he was away from his family, or Yaakov, who was bereft of the Shechina for 22 years? Yaakov Avinu's punishment was worse. Medrash Rabbeinu HaKadosh says that we learned from there that the punishment of listening to Lashon Hara is even worse than speaking Lashon Hara. Although I told you that the Chavetz Chaim said that it's impossible to say this Medrash can't be accurate, because it's impossible to say on Yaakov the Bechir Sheba Avos, whose image is chokuk on the Kisei HaKavod, that he was guilty of Kabbalas Lashon Hara. And indeed, a big argument in defense of the Chavetz Chaim is, on what he's saying, he doesn't need my defense, is we find nowhere in the Gemara that Yaakov Avinu is held accountable for Kabbalas Lashon Hara. We find Dibara said on Yosef, but we don't find it ever about Yaakov Avinu. It's interesting that the Amshin of a Rebbe says an interesting pshat, that when Yosef told his father, he told it as one who goes to a Rebbe that Yaakov Avinu should be mispalel for his children, that they shouldn't succumb to these temptations. Now, you're allowed to ask a Rebbe for a bracha, and therefore there would be no Kabbalas Lashon Hara in that case. But either way, Yaakov still, the Gemara does criticize Yaakov Avinu for the Shtei Sla Milas, for giving the Kseinas Pasim, the multicolored cloak, and therefore it's possible to answer Rabbeinu Bachya's question, where do you have 10 that are guilty, that are punished in Asara Harugei Malchus, there was only 9. The answer is that the 10th one, since we said according to the Arizal that Rabbi Akiva was a Gilgal of Yaakov, that's why Yaakov is embedded in the name Akiva, so therefore Yaakov himself was part of the problem because Yaakov gave the Shnei Sla Milas, which generated the Mechira in the first place. It's very interesting because I told you once before that the Ben Ish Chai says that Rabbi Yochanan, the Gadol Ador, who had the tragedy of Dame Garma Dasira Bir, he buried 10 children. I told you once that the Kozma Rebbe said, Ich bin mehr von Rabbi Yochanan. Because the Kozma Rebbe lost a wife and 11 children. But Lamaisa is, it's brought down in the Ben Ish Chai that Rabbi Yochanan buried 10 children, and that was also because of the Asara Harugei Mal, also because of the Mechiras Yosef. And therefore the Rabbi Yochanan, who was a Gadol Adar, his 10 children had to die because of the sin of Mechiras Yosef. Again, we have the Shaila of the Rabbeinu Bachich, who's only 9. It's interesting that we know that it says, Dein Garmad Asira Bir, this is the bone of my 10th child. So they bring down that Rabbi Yochanan's 10th child fell into a vat of boiling liquid, and all his skin was scalded, was stripped off, and therefore all that was left was bone. So it's interesting because that's mamish a zeicher of Mechiras Yosef, because by Mechiras Yosef, Yosef was stripped and put into a bar. So it's mamish. It shows, and it's interesting also that Rabbi Akiva's skin was also stripped b'masrek shel barzel, with an iron comb. So you see the allusions to Mechiras Yosef. Now, it says, the Yisrael Oaves Yosef Mikol Bonov, Ki Ben Zekunim Hulai. Ben Zekunim, we know, he was his mezinical, and he called Hashem Lamed B'Shem Mei V'Masalai. So he made him a ksoines pas. So the Sefer Nifloi Secha Sicha says a Moiridik Maisa from Rav Shach. Moiridik Maisa. A Bacher came to Yeshiva Tupanovich from Australia, and he was a Moiridik Bal Chesed. He was just an incredibly kind person, which brought him to the attention of Rav Shach, and he became close to Rav Shach. At that time, he was married and he had no children. He asked Rav Shach for a bracha for children, and Tzadik Goyzev HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim, he had twin sons. So when it came to the bris, so he said to Rav Shach that he wants to give one son the kois to Rav Shach and one son the kois to his father. So Rav Shach gave him an odd answer. Rav Shach said, either I'll be son the kois for both or for neither. So he said, yeah, but I want to give one to my father. So he said, so no problem, so give them both to your father. So he was a little bit stymied, but he wasn't going to give up the Gadol Adar being son the kois, so he gave them both. He asked Rav Shach, what should I give my father? He says, give him son the kamida to hold both babies. So that's what he did. He gave Rav Shach the 2 son the kois, and when the brachas were made, the father held both babies. So later on, he went to Rav Shach and said to Rav Shach, is Rav Shiva find anything troubling with my father? He said, I said, you should give both son the kois to your father. He said, but why didn't the Rav Shiva want a pshara? So he says, let me explain to you. Your boys are going to grow up, and one of them is going to have as Rav Sandik Rav Shach, and one of them is going to have your father. And I'm afraid that the one that had the Sandikos from your father will be jealous of his brother. Everybody will always say, you know who the Sandik was? I didn't want that to happen. I learned it out from Yaakov. You don't give one more than the other. So either I would be with both, or I would be with neither. What a lesson. Now, you see how a tzaddik is Reyes HaNoilid. He looks in the future. But as a Rav, I learned another lesson from this. Rav Shach could have told him the reason. He didn't tell him the reason. You know why? Because if Shach would have told him the reason, he would have argued with him. And he would say, no, I would tell the other son that it was kibbut b'ain. If the Rav tells a reason, people will argue. And since they have negiyas, they're not clear. They don't think it through clear. Rav Shach didn't have any negiyas. So Rav Shach made sure not to give the reason. Later once it already happened, so then there's no negiyas anymore, it happened already, then he explained the reason. But b'shas ma'isa, he didn't give the reason. I think that's a very important. People say, well, I want the rabbi to tell me the reason. A lot of times, it's correct that the Rav doesn't give the reason. This is the way it is. Explain to me, no. Because b'shas ma'isa, the person that hears it is nagei b'davar, and since he's nagei b'davar, he can't be impartial. He can't think it through like the Rav, who doesn't have any negiyas. It says, "V'lo yachlu dabroi l'shalom." They weren't able to speak to Yosef in peace. They weren't able to. So there's a fascinating Targum. Targum Unkus, very fascinating. Says the Targum, V'loi tzovain l'malalon l'shlam. They didn't want to speak to him peacefully. Now the pasuk doesn't say they didn't want. The pasuk says that they can't. Isn't that interesting? Look again at the pasuk. V'lo yochlu dabru l'shalom. They weren't able to speak to him peacefully. Says the Targum, it's not that they couldn't. They didn't want him. V'lo tzovan l'malon l'shalom. So this begs the question. Why doesn't the Targum translate the pasuk? The pasuk says that they can't. Targum says, what do you mean they can't? They could have. They didn't want him. So the Targum is teaching us an incredible lesson. When you don't want to do something, you're right. B'metzias, you can't do it. But if you would have wanted to do it, then Hashem would give you the siyata d'shmaya that then you'd be able to do it. Isn't that a remarkable lesson? Because b'derech sheroitza adam loleches moilichen oisai. The way a person wants to go, that's the way they're led. So right now, you can't. But if you'd want to, then Hashem would give you. I'll give you a simple example. Person says, I can't get up early to daven. You're right. Right now, you can't. But if you would want to, Hashem would give you the extra kaya. That's pshat ein davar oimed b'fnei haratzon. That's pshat. If there's a will, there's a way. It's such a ridiculous lesson because the Torah is testifying v'lo yachloi dabar l'shalom. They weren't able to. They can't. But says the Targum, they didn't want to. Because if they wanted to, Hashem would have given them the extra siyata d'shmaya, the extra kaya. Here's a person. He says, I can't get along with my wife. She's impossible. How much do you want Shechina? How much do you want Shalom Bayis? If you really want it, that's why the Goyin says, in the word Bereshis is the 6 important pursuits of life. B'tachan, Ratzon, Ava, Shtika, Yira, and Torah. He counts Ratzon as one of the 6 most important things. It's interesting. They bring down a Maisa that Rav Tenenbaum, Zichron Labracha, was summoned Erev Yom Kippur to the house of the Brisker Rav. And the Brisker Rav said to Rav Tenenbaum that there's a yeshiva bacher in jail because of some bureaucratic problems with the draft. And the Brisker Rav was asking Rav Tenenbaum to get him out of jail before Yom Kippur. So Rav Tenenbaum says, I can't, the Misradah is closed there of Yom Kippur. The whole bureaucracy is shut down. So the Brisker Rav said, look, I'm only asking you to do what you can, but don't tell me you can't. Tell me you don't want to. What was he saying? Saying if you really want to, there'll be a way to do it. And he called up a government official. The government official says, I can't. So he mimicked the words. He says, don't say you can't, say you don't want to. They managed to get him out. Tremendous lesson here. It's a tremendous lesson. People will find that if they really want something, Hashem will give them extra kaiches to be able to do something. What an amazing lesson. Vayomer lo Yaakov. His brother said to him, Hamaloich timloich aleinu? Will you rule over us? Imashal timshal banu? Will you dominate us? So of course the question is, why does it say the double language? Hamaloich timloich. Hamoshal timshal. Why does it say double language? So both the Amik David and before the Archaim HaKadosh, they both say that what they said was, is this not a nevuah? You're dreaming about lording over us. And therefore, since you think about it during the day, that's why you're dreaming it in the night. He said, this proves that you have delusions of grandeur. And that's Pshat HaMaloich, because you think about ruling Timloich, that's why you dreamed about it. HaMashol, you think about dominating Timshol, that's why you dreamed about it. And Mamela, since it was proved that he was thinking about it during the day, that's the way Chaim Lamekdavar learned. So it's interesting that the Gaon, who of course was the ultimate word master and always showed us the different nuances in words, he said, what's the difference between a melech and a moshel? He says a king rules with his subjects' approval. A moshel is somebody who sees control, a dictator, a tyrant. So the brothers said, what do you think the interpretation of the dream is? Hamaloich timloich, will we accept you as a king? Or is it going to be a domination? Or is it going to be a moshel timshel alein? Now the Maisa is, both were true. Because initially, they thought he was the Egyptian viceroy, and that was Moshe. When they found out he was Yosef, then they accepted him, and that was Melech. Says the Gaon, that's pshat in a series of psukim that we are very familiar with. Ki la'Hashem ha'melucha u'Moshe b'Goyim. For us, Hashem is our king. We accept him. Avinu Malkeinu. For the Goyim, U'Moshe b'Goyim, they didn't accept him. But Vayaishev Gems al kol aretz. One day Hashem will be accepted by everyone. Melech al kol aretz. So it fits perfectly. Now, you know me, I'm fascinated by names and by Shma Gorim. The name foretells the destiny. By the way, for those that are use TorahAnytime.com, there's a fascinating share that I gave in the Tarrytown Hilton last week. Jewish names, the crystal ball of Judaism. It's on TorahAnytime.com under Jewish thought. By the way, speaking about my shiurim, which Baruch Hashem heard and viewed all over the world, we are looking presently for a sponsor for Kol Alosh and Mishnah Yomis. We just started Nida, the last Masechta, in Shas Bavli, and we don't have a sponsor yet for Mishnayos Nida. So if anybody is interested, please call me at 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. Of course, that's 2 Mishnayos a day. 718-906-6471 is the free number to call, a direct number to my Mishnah Yomis. You can learn with me 2 Mishnahs a day and join people all over the world that are tuning in, from vacationers in Florida to people in Australia to people in Eretz Yisrael and London, in California. So if you would like to sponsor and have your name mentioned every day throughout the entire Masechtas Nida, call me at 718-916-3100 or email me at rmmwsi@aol.com. Now, so when I talk about names, we know that Yehuda married his Rebbetzin Shua, and they had a terrible tragedy. First, Shua died, and then their two young children, Er and Einan, died. It's interesting that the name Shua, I would think, is important for disaster. Shua, Shin Vav Ayin, is the same letters as Esav. And how Yehuda took a wife with the same letters as Esav, it's true that it also is the same letters as Shaveya, and it has the gematria of Shalom. I told you that's in Mesechtes Kala Rabasa. It says that whoever pursues Shalom ain't Tfilas Chayzeres Reikam, because Shalom and Shaveya are the same gematria, and Shua is the letters of Shaveya, but it's also the letters of Esav. And of course, Er is Ra and Einon is grief. Now I want to just mention quickly about an incredible man who most people know nothing about. And that was Yehuda's friend. Yehuda's friend, Chira Ish Ha'adulami. Now, most people know nothing about Chira. The Netziv gives us a clue. The Netziv says in the Hamikdavar, Shaya Adam Chashiv Ma'id. Chira Ha'adulami was an Adam Chashiv Ma'id. A very, very, very special person. Now, in Bereishis Rabbah, we get a further clue. Somebody asks you who lived the longest. So most people turn to Serach Bas Asher, and they turn to Achya Shiloini or Mesushelach, the different people that the Rambam mentioned in the chain of the Messiah. But the Medrash tells us that Chira, who was over here, Yehuda's friend, is the same as Chiram, Shahaya Bimei David. And the Medrash says that according to the opinion of the Rabbanan, Chira lived for 1,200 years. Was one of the longest living people in the history of mankind. What was Chira's great schus? So we find over here that when it says Vayered Yehuda had a big downturn in his Hatzlacha. And we find that Yehuda interesting. We find that Yehuda, in this situation, when it says Vayered Yehuda, he was demoted by his brothers, because when they saw the tremendous grief that Yaakov had, they said, "You're not deserving to lead us anymore." So they demoted him. And we find that then his wife died and his two children died. Everything was now normally when people have such bad mazel, then everybody says, he's too hot to handle. They hang around with other people. But Chira stood loyal to him, and this trait of Chira was found over 1,000 years later with David HaMelech. Because by David HaMelech it says, Ki oyev haya Chiram leDavid kol hayomim. Chiram was a friend to David all his life. Now David also was too hot to handle. A lot of people were out to get David, and the king was trying to kill him, right? And David HaMelech was pursued. He was pursued by his son, by Adonio, by Avshalom. David HaMelech it was easy to stay clear of David, because if you're with David, you were a target of many people. But Hiram was loyal. The reward for being a loyal friend, Rabbeinu Shalom likes it when people are loyal. That's a great trait. And we see it's a trait that's linked to longevity. And I said this once before, I believe. It's my own word, so if you don't like it, you don't have to leave with it. But the unusual name Adulami, if you jumble the words, spells Modali, a friend to me. It was the trait of loyalty. A friend in need is a friend indeed. Unfortunately, in today's society, which is so a society that lives on disposables, people are very fickle. And, people move away, and friendships dissipate. To be a loyal friend is something that the Torah champions greatly. Just to round this off, I once told you that why is a friend called the Yedid? Because it's two hands clasped, yad, yad. There's 14 knuckles in the hand, that's 14 yad. Two hands clasped is Yedid, a friend, yad, yad. And Yedid, 14 plus 14, is koyach, 28, because in friendship and loyalty is strength. Vayaishev Yaakov. So here we have the famous Rashi. Vayaishev Yaakov. Bikesh Yaakov leishev b'shalva. Yaakov wanted to have solitude. Yaakov wanted to have serenity. Yaakov wanted to have tranquility. Kafetz alav roigzai shel Yosef. So my Rebbe Ramosha Zechtav V'Kodesh Bracha Schus Yagan Aleinu at an Aguda convention many years ago, and it's printed up in the Dorash Moshe. Ramosha said, "What's wrong with a tzaddik asking for shalva? What is Rashi indicating? That there's something wrong for a tzaddik to ask for a peaceful existence?" He says, the Ramosha says, the Beferish Gemara in Sanhedrin, Ayin Vav Amid Beis, Shalvas HaTzadikim Hana L'Olam. Ramosha had peacefulness. He was able to put out many volumes of Igros Moshe, many volumes of Dibros Moshe. It's a Hana to the Olam. When a tzaddik is allowed to have tranquility, he's able to accomplish things. So Ramosha says, what's wrong? Rashi seems to imply that there was something, as soon as he wanted shalva, right away popped up the problems of Yosef. What's wrong? Ramosha says, what's wrong with a tzaddik wanting serenity, wanting harmony, to be able to learn Torah and do avodah? He says, and if the tzaddik gets a pleasurable olam hazeh, says Rav Moshe, it's a Gemara in Hurya, Staf Yud Amid Beis, Mi Sani L'Tzadikim, the Achlei Trei Almei. Is it anything wrong with tzaddikim that they get shtei shulchanas? They have a wonderful olam hazeh and a wonderful olam haba. There are some people that they see a Talmid Chacham in a nice home or driving a nice car, and they say, no, he's a Talmid Chacham, he should drive a jalopy. No, he has olam haba, he has Torah, shouldn't get olam hazeh too. Says the Gemara in Hurya, Misani, is it hated that a tzaddik should have shtei shulchanos? So Ramosha says, what's Shan in this Rashi? So at the Aguda convention, Ramosha said, Yitzoid Otzim. He says, Yaakov thought that he doesn't have to trouble himself to pray for his, and put in koiches in his children anymore. He says they're all developed, they're all shiftei kah. Remember we said that he looked at their names and he saw there wasn't a ches or a tes in their names. There was no chait. So Bikesh Yaakov leishev b'shalva. He said, listen, there's no more to daven for my children. They're self-sufficient. Immediately, says Rav Moshe, Kavtza alav roigzai shel Yosef. Rav Moshe said at the Aguda convention many years ago, he said, a father can never rest from praying for his children. He said, first of all, the Gemara says, one man Yama says 22, one man Yama says 24. So people that think that chinuch is only until bar mitzvah, and then they say Baksha Petrani, and it's a free ride, he says that's for sure not. But then he said, you see from here, even more older than 22 and 24. You can never rest. A father can never rest. A mother, mama can never rest from praying for their children. He says, that's pshat. Bikesh Yaakov leishev b'shalva. Now, on the pasuk, Vayefka Isai Aviv, that his father cried for him. His father cried for Yosef. So there's a Moirdik Tzrar Amar. The Tzrar Amar, which is one of the ancient Tzvarim on Chumash, the Tzrar Amar writes that because Yaakov cried so bitterly for Yosef, those tears allowed that he should be sold close to Mitzrayim and not as a slave in some distant land. It's brought down that because because he refused to be comforted, that's why he was able to refuse. Yaakov refused to be comforted. That gave a schus to Yosef HaTzadik to refuse the advances. If Yaakov would have allowed himself to be comforted and was Masiach Das and went on living and forgot about Yosef, then Yosef, as we learned in today's daf, would have not been able to conjure up the Demus Dyuknai Shalaviv that saved him. But the bottom line is we see the value of the tefillas of a tata. Tell you a maisa with the Ger Rebbe with the Beis Yisrael. A person in Eretz Yisrael needed to travel to America to have a critical operation. That was a sakana, tremendous sakana. And he went to the Beis Yisrael and said, I have an elderly father, and I'm a supik whether I should tell my father that I'm going to Eretz Yisrael for the surgery, because I don't want to cause my father agmas nefesh. He'll worry about it. So Beis Yisrael paskin he should tell his father because of this Tzrar Hamar. He quoted the Tzrar Hamar, and he said that don't deprive yourself of your father being mispalel for you. The koyach of the tears of a tata and mama, you know the value of them? So I'll tell you another Ger Maisa, which is fascinating. A Ger Chassid had a son learning in the Sfas Emes Yeshiva. And that time the Yeshiva was the Pnei Menachem. So one day the Tata came to the Beis Medrash and asked the Pnei Menachem how his son is doing. So he told him, Baruch Hashem Elent. Okay. A few days later, somebody tells him, I was in the yeshiva, and the Yeshiva, the Pnei Menachem, couldn't stop talking about your son. What a Metzuyan he is. So the father found this very strange, and he went back to the yeshiva and he says, I don't understand. I have to hear secondhand that my son is Metzuyan. I ask you said he's learning Baruch Hashem. So the Pnei Menachem looked at him and he says, to a tata, I never tell the full truth, because I want the tata to daven. If I told you he was Metzuyan, you might not daven as much. And the tefillos of a tata make a very big difference. More ridiculous. The Maisa brought down by my Elta Zayda, the Imreish Zecher Tzadik Levrachas Chusi Yagan Aleinu, that the Chassam Sofer said about the Imreish that he was a Talmud Chaver. So the Imreish once met the Chassam Sofer, the Chassam Sofer's son. He was talking to him and learning, and he was mamish incredibly impressed. So the Imreish went to the Chassam Sofer to tell him what a Moiridik Talmud Chacham his son is. So the Chassam Sofer said to the Imreish, you have no idea kama demois shafachti ba'avur Torahs b'ni. You have no idea how many tears I shed for the Torah of my son. I've told you many times the great tzaddikim write ethical wills. It's not a tzavah of the distribution of wealth and assets. It's an ethical will. An ethical will is lessons to the children. So in the ethical will of the Siftei Tzaddik, he quotes a Tana de Be'Eliyahu Rabbah. Tana Be'Eliyahu Rabbah is in Perek Yud Ches. It says over there, Maisa b'Koyin Echad. There was a Maisa with a certain Koyin Yorei Shemayim b'Seiser, he was a Bahaltana, a hidden Yorei Shemayim. Ubechol Yoim, every day, Mispalel, Shelo Yerach Chet Oidover Mechua Lebanav, that no sin or ugly thing should happen to his children. It's interesting. He didn't even daven that they should have Torah greatness, just that no sin or ugly thing should happen to us. Sometimes you hear that somebody's son got caught with the computer or with other sins. There's no sin or something ugly should happen to his children. And it says that every day he davened this. And it says that his children, he was zeicher to see 50 years of children and grandchildren. And from his children became Kohanim Gedolim. So the Siftzei Tzaddik wrote in his ethical will, asking his children that you should pray that you should never be embarrassed from your own actions or from the actions of your children or grandchildren. By the way, the place to daven for this is in benching. It's brought down by the Mefarshei benching when we say in Racheng, Shaloi Nevaish V'loi Nikolein. So there's two pshatim, Shaloi Nevaish B'banim V'loi B'nikolim B'bnei Banim, and those that have the Girsa V'loi Nikosho is the next generation. And Loi Nevaish B'olam Hazeh V'noi Nikolim L'olam Haba. Say over from Rabbi Arulam Mebels that for Banim Kisherim, Aser Lahaniach Afilu Shmoine Esrei Echad Yevesha. It's an amazing statement. He says that parents should pray for Banim Kisherim, you should not leave even one Shmoine Esrei dry-eyed. And he adds, Rabbi Arulam Mebels adds, that you should pray for your children even after they get married. It's interesting that some people say their parents never invite them over, they never give them things. But sometimes parents do other things. Sometimes parents daven for their children. It's not so noticeable, but it helps them throughout life. And we as parents, grandparents, great-grandparents have to know that this is included in Alzois Yisfalo Kol Chassid Leis Matzai. For this, every pious person should pray towards the time of finding. Right? To pray, because we're reactionaries. To pray in anticipation, and to pray, first of all, that our children should be safe. They should be safe on the road. They should be, the grandchildren should be safe when they go on and off the bus. They should be spared from the hostilities of today's hostile media. They should be saved from the problems of children on the fringe. A person should daven this in Sim Shalom and Shalom Rav and Shema Kaleinu. I want to make one more comment on Bikesh Yaakov Leishe B'Shalva. Because again, like my Rebbe, Moshe Zechtav Kosh Rabbi Tzchus Yogan Aleinu says, it's a pella. What's wrong with Leisha B'Shalva? So in the Sefer Bas Ayin has a very novel pshat in this Rashi. It says, Bikesh Yaakov Leisha B'Shalva, Yaakov prayed that he should have serenity. Therefore, Kofso Alav Roigzei Shel Yosef. That's why the incident happened. Because we know that the Medrash tells us that Yaakov was supposed to go down to Mitzrayim in Shalshaloi Shel Barzel, in chains. That wouldn't have been Shalva. But because Yosef went down to Mitzrayim, he came down as royalty, visiting royalty. So that was an answer. The Roigzei Shel Yosef, that Yosef went down to Mitzrayim, was an answer to Yaakov's tefillah for Shalva. That paved the way that Yaakov should go down to Mitzrayim with serenity and tranquility. I want to share with you a story from the Divrei Chaim. The Heilige Divrei Chaim, the Tzanzer of one of the greatest of the Hasidic Admorim, the father of Klosenberg and Sanz and Baviv. The Divrei Chaim was not only a genius in Torah, a Paisik Otzim, but is also known as an incredible philanthropist. an incredible Baal Tzedakah. He never went to sleep with money. Unbelievable thing. Such a foreign attitude to Americans. He never went to sleep with money. So one time a man came to him, he says he has no money, he has a daughter, he has to marry off. So the Divrei Chaim didn't have that much, he gave him what he could, but he wrote a letter to the Rav in his town that he should help this man. The man came to the Rav, and the Rav said, look, I don't have the apparatus for this, I'm busy with Shiurim, I can't do it. So the man went back to the Rebbe, to the Divrei Chaim. The Divrei Chaim helped him. When this Rav came to the Kozmiga court, the Rebbe refused to give him his hand. So he mamish didn't know what it was about. Ma pishi, ma cheti. What's my trespass? What's my sin? That the Rebbe, the Divrei Chaim doesn't want to offer me his hand. I mean, he's a man, he's a Ma'abed Torah, he's learning Torah, he's an Erlich Rav. So he says to him, Divrei Chaim posed the question to him. He said, look, when Yaakov fought with the Malach, it says, Vayeishev ish imai. And Rashi says, who is the ish? Soroi shel Esav. The bad guy. Sam Kale. Here in this week's Parsha, it says, Vayishaleyu ha'ish leima matavakesh. When Yosef was looking for the brothers, so the man says, what do you want? So Rashi says it was Gavriel. So Divrei Chaim says, how did Rashi know that this Ish in this week's Parsha is Gavriel, and the Ish in last week's Parsha, V'yavik Ishimai, was Sarah Shel Esav? So the Divrei Chaim told the Rav, when you ask him, Borcheni, bless me, and he says, no, Shalcheni, because I got to go say Tefillah, I don't have time, I got to go say Zmiris. I got to go say tefillas. So this person doesn't want to help a yid because he's too busy, even with good zachen. That's Sarah Shaleis. When a person says Matavakesh, that's Gabriel. It's a sharp lesson. It's a sharp lesson. You can't find excuses to help a yid. Vayishalchu es ksaynes hapasim. They sent to their father the tunic, which was ripped and dripped in blood, vayaveyu el aviem, and it was brought to their father. There was a letter that was sent from Reb Tzadok HaKohen to the Chidushei Arim. It was a letter, it was actually a tshuva about the halachas of Aguna, which Reb Tzadok HaKohen sent to the Chidushei Arim. Amongst the different intricacies of the laws of Aguna was a proof that you could identify a dead body by the clothing that he was wearing. And therefore, if they found a dead body and it says it was a plaid jacket and gray pants, you could identify the body, and it's considered a siman muvik, and you don't have to worry that it was maybe somebody else that he gave a loan of his clothing to. And the raya was because they sent the Ksaynas Pasim and they brought it to the father, and we don't say that maybe Yosef gave it to somebody else, gave it as a loan. So as the letter, there was no post office in those days, as the letter was traveling to the Chidushei Arim, the courier stayed overnight in the house of the Rav of the city. And the Rav wanted to see the tshuva, and when he saw this, he said, I don't think it's a raya, what Reb Tzadok HaKohen is saying, because the Mai says, you see that Yosef was alive. So you see that it wasn't a good simon. So you see that it's not a raya. So Chidushei Arim didn't think that that was a kasha in Reb Tzadok HaKohen. He said, from the fact that the Torah presents it as a raya, that's a raya, it is a good raya. The fact that Yosef was alive, that was a special siyata d'shmaya. But I wanted to say that it's not a good proof for a different reason. Maybe somebody's jacket, somebody's pants, he would lend to somebody. Maybe it's not a right. But Yosef would not have given away the Ksaynas Pasim. Ksaynas Pasim was a historical beged, which was from Adam Arishan, was given over to Nimrod, given over to Esav, and then Yaakov used it and was passed on. And Yaakov bequeathed it to Yosef. It was special big day kahuna. It was a token of love from his father. He wouldn't have given that as a loan to someone. How could you bring a raya from here? So on that is a shtukul kasha on Rav Tzadok HaKohen's raya, which is Tzorachiyim. Vayaker Yehuda. Yehuda recognized his stick and his signet ring, and he said, Tzodka, she is right, she is righteous, mimeni, it's from me. Now this was a huge test of Yehuda. Huge test. It says, Yosef Shekidei Shem Shemayim B'Seiser. They had it in today's daf. It's cited Daf Lamed Vav. Yosef that sanctified Hashem's name in private because nobody saw what was doing with Baitifar. One letter of Hashem's name was added to him. That's why he's known as Yehosef. Eidus B'Hoisef. Yehuda, that was Mekadosh Shem Sharayim Barabim, and allowed himself to be shamed. He has the whole Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. There's a time Yonis Ben Uziel that asks in this week's parsha, why are we called Yehudim? Now, most people assume that we're called Yehudim because we're people of thanks. This nation I created for me because they will relate my praise. We're people of thanks. We're people that say 100 brachas every day. We're people that say Moedim. That's why we're called Yehudim, and that's true. There's a time in Yonis Ben Uziel that says something else over here. It's a moiridik targum Yonis Ben Uziel. Yehuda, antoi disu al uvda de tamar. You admitted to the truth. Begin kach yiskar in Yehuda and al shmecha. All Jews will be called after you. The national name of Klal Yisrael was Yehudim. Jews admit to the truth. Whenever you tell your wife, I was wrong, you're a Jew. In the fullest sense of the word. You say to your wife, I was wrong, I admit it, you're a Yehudi. You tell your friend, I was wrong in business, I was wrong, you're a Yehudi. It's a very big thing. That's the meaning of being Yehudi. But there's a huge kasha. The Sefer Oitzes Penina HaTorah quotes the kasha from Harav Shmuel Fundeler. Zechet Tzaddik Gevrochas Chus Yorgen Aleinu. Who do you think was bigger? Tamar that was willing to die with her 2 unborn children? Or Yehuda? Here we say our national name is Yehuda. He has all the letters of Hashem's name. Wasn't Tamar's act bigger than Yehuda's act? And he minds from this a tremendous lesson. That public embarrassment is worse than death. Public embarrassment is worse than death. And it's borne out by the famous Maimer Chazal, Hamal b'mpnei chaveiro b'rabim ein lo chelek lo olam haba. You habitually embarrass somebody publicly, you don't have olam haba. There's no such sin for murder. Murder is Mises Bestin, but you don't lose your olam haba. But Hamal b'mpnei, public embarrassment is worse than death. Now, in today's day and age, it's never been so possible to embarrass people as publicly. Person writes an email, sends it out to his whole contact list, something of embarrassing disgrace to a person. It's barabim all over the world. This one sends it to his contact list, that one sends it to his contact list, that one sends it to her contact list. Before long, it's a rabim that's unimaginable. You also have to know, school bullying usually involves public embarrassment. Ha 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 ha. You don't know how to do it in front of all the whole class. That's flirting with the laws of Olam Haba. It has to be. I want to point something out that's remarkable. When we're Makabel Reish Chodesh, we ask for a lot of things. Chaim Aruchim, Chaim Shel Shalom, Chaim Shel Parnasa, a lot of things. We only ask for one negative. Chaim She'ein Ba'em Busha Klima. Isn't that interesting? That's the only negative that we ask for. We don't say Chaim She'ein Ba'em Tsar. We don't say Chaim She'ein Ba'em Tzoros. We say Chaim She'ein Ba'em Busha Klima. You get an idea how terrible Busha and Klima is. That's the only thing, only one negative that we ask that we should be spared from. Chaim She'ein Ba'em Busha Klima. Because that's how terrible. And we see from this Maisa, Yehuda's act was greater than Tamar. Tamar, Taka was willing to give her life and the life of her two unborn children. But Yehuda took upon himself public embarrassment. Public embarrassment is worse than death. And that's why many times in our tefillos we ask Hashem, V'loi nevaish, V'loi nevaish, V'loi nikalim. We should daven with tremendous kavanah. Public embarrassment. That's why it's one of the most severe acts of treachery to a marriage for a husband to embarrass his wife or a wife to embarrass a husband publicly. Now, there are reasons why this happens. Because if a husband treats his wife nicely only in public and he's not nice to her at home, she's tempted to act and say, I'll show the Olam what you really are. It's a big temptation. But it's a great treachery of the marital bond for a spouse to embarrass one another in public. Remember, what's the first praise of the Eishes Chayil? Botach b'olei bayla. That her husband knows he can count on her. And he doesn't know if he can count on anybody. It's a fickle word. A person can work for a company 20 years and Monday finds a pink slip. Overnight. It's a fickle world. People are friends one day, the next day they stab you in the back. Spouse, batach b'olei bayla. Husband, ana okir, I will cherish her. The sin of embarrassing a spouse in front of people, I'm not surprised. You always behave this way in front of people. Is a great treachery to a marriage. May we be zeicha that we should train our children never to embarrass people. In that merit, we should be safe from embarrassment.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.